documents, or if you ask them questions about their finances and they really don't know or don't have access to that, oh, my son takes care of all that for me, and and that there's not a smile on their face when they say that, or they're not happy with that. As you can also see it by our bills not being paid. Is there a sudden stop in cash flow that they're complaining about? And generally, it's hard to detect because people are reluctant to speak about their situation. So those are all the reasons.
Okay. So you talked lots about the different types of elder abuse or senior abuse that we can see. Can you sort of talk about the ones that are most prevalent? You touched a little bit on all the ones that you had there, but are there ones that are more prevalent than others?
Well, we have some research. It's hard to gather this research because no one wants to talk about it.
Right.
But back in 2015, there was it's a landmark Canadian study that was completed by the National Initiative for the Care of the Elderly in Toronto. And so they did surveys with folks. And basically what they found, talking to older adults, that 8.2% of them reported suffering some form of abuse. Now at that time, so it was from the previous year, and so they asked the question, in the past year, have you suffered from elder abuse? And so 8.2%, which astonished me when I first heard that. But then when I extrapolated that and realized that was 800,000 older Canadians at that time in 2014, that's a huge number we're reporting.
That's a huge number, yeah.
And so we know that, the demographics have shifted. So the numbers aren't going down, they're going up. And the two types that at that time through that research, which is not really surprising, the two types, psychological abuse came in at 2.7% reports, and financial came in a really close second at 2.6. And oftentimes those go hand in hand. You'll be intimidated to turn over your financial matters to someone potentially. So oftentimes those go hand in hand, but that gives you some data.
Can you talk a little bit more about the financial abuse part of that, about power of attorney and all of that? Can you speak to any of that?
Yeah, I certainly can. So powers of attorney really are the folks that we should think very long and hard about. And you don't have to have a power of attorney. Some people opt not to. But those folks are supposed to come into play when we can no longer make decisions for ourselves. But you have to recognize that once you sign a power of attorney form, at that time it can be used. So there's a two-pronged piece there. That's not so much with power of attorney for personal care. I am going to talk about finance, but I just want to make a distinction here. With power of attorney for personal care, it's pretty much when you can no longer make the decisions for yourself as deemed by clinicians, that they'll ask that person to step up and help make, your care plan. But with finance, once it's signed, it's pretty much a tool that they can use. Now, ideally, in a perfect world, that's not going to be an issue. But if they decide to walk into your bank with that document, or somehow you give them privy to your information, your banking information, that's how a lot of this stuff can happen. So that's one form of financial abuse that we see quite often, that we deal with. The other is the frauds and scams that I alluded to at the beginning. We've all probably heard of those CRA calls, and there's a whole bunch of new ones that are happening now with COVID. And I really recommend that your listeners visit the Canadian Antifraud Centre, because they constantly post what the newest types of scams are, so we can, as best as we can, stay ahead of the curve. But they don't just perpetrate them on seniors, but seniors sometimes are more trusting and maybe there to answer the phone, perhaps a bit more vulnerable. So it seems to be, even with romance scams now, we see a huge escalation of these being perpetrated against older adults.
Okay.
And I do want to say too, if anyone has fallen victim to a scam, the Canadian Antifraud Centre is also a wonderful place to be able to report it. And so once they have those reports, they can advise and learn from that to try to stop them.
Okay, great. Just so our listeners know that at the end of the video, we will be posting some of these websites that Sheila has mentioned, so you do have that information. So that's great. Thanks, Sheila. So if we're a friend or a family member or a neighbor, like what's the best way for us to approach somebody that we might suspect or we're not sure, but we want to reach out to them? How do we do that? What's the best way? Because we're always talking about, being awkward, but yes, it needs to come out, and we don't want to shy away from helping somebody if that's happening.
Right.
Yeah.
So we want to do it with an open heart, right? We want to just ask that person how they're doing, and to respect that it might not be something they want to talk about. But if it is something they disclose to you that they want to talk about, first and foremost, believe them. The responsible, oh, I can't believe X person would do that. They're so, doors are going to shut because it probably took quite a bit for them to, this is not a time to dialogue whether this is their reality or not. Consider it their reality, and then ask them what they want to do about it. Coming up with, your 20-item list of how they can solve this problem may be beneficial in a way, but this is their life, and it may be very frustrating, but they may not wish to do anything about it at this moment in time, especially if it's a family member. So, believe them, ask how they are, reassure them that you'll be there if they ever change their mind and do want to reach out for interventions. You'll walk with them on that journey. Really, how else would they like to be helped? That's kind of what we want to make sure happens. And then, this isn't going to be solved in a single dialogue, most likely. So keep those lines of communication open.
Okay, thank you for those tips. So something else that can help us with this is who can we call, and because you briefly spoke about at the beginning about the actual criminal, so the person in the mall grabbing the woman's purse, it ends up being a crime. So do we report it? And also who do we approach? Is it the police? Is it how does that work in those sort of aspects?
Sure. Well, in Ontario, different provinces have different elder abuse kind of service provision allotments. And in Ontario, we really don't have an adult protective services per se. But we, Canadian law has certain categories that include abuse, and that, there's charges for fraud, charges for assault, charges for sexual assault, uttering threats, criminal harassment. They're all crimes under the Canadian Criminal Code. So those are all chargeable offenses. Elder abuse or seniors abuse does not come up as a separate offense covered by the current code, and that's something that's a criminal code offense, does not cease to be an offense just because the person is older. So it's not there. It's not dependent on age. The Canadian Criminal Code, you could be 20 and have an assault, and 82 and have an assault. They don't have a separate jurisdiction around the fact that it's an older person.
Okay.
The one thing I do want to say that is kind of exciting in a way is that there are new laws in the criminal code now around theft by power of attorney. And that's something that, it can happen at any age, but generally that is something that we see happens often with older adults. So there is some move towards supporting charges in that area. Really, I would say the concerns, if they're physical in nature or they're those chargeable offenses that I just listed, if you go to police, an investigation will ensue if they're doing, if they're able to investigate. So you need to be aware of that. So if an investigation is not something that you want as a victim, then you have to think twice about that. The person reporting the abuse may remain anonymous. However, usually the police need that to build any kind of case towards change. The police can lay criminal charges if they have reasonable grounds to believe a crime has been committed. So it might come, the person might not say, no, I don't want that person charged. If the police see enough grounds, they can lay them themselves. And then, another real big support, or a place not so much to report it to, but a support after the fact, is victims' crisis assistance and referral services. The victim witness place they'll also very much help walk people who have been abused through the journey to get them the resources they need. And for elder abuse specifically, there is a fabulous resource It's called the Senior Safety Line, and I'm sure you'll put that number up for your listeners. It's 24-hour crisis support line that a person can call in Ontario. Any type of an abuse or neglect. It is not just for those suffering from abuse or neglect. It can also be for family members or other people in that person's circle that want to know what resources might be available. I mean, I've called it as a service provider in regions, in communities where I don't know what services exist. So it's definitely a wonderful service.
Okay.
24/7, 200 languages. It's senior friendly, and you get a live counselor available to help you walk through it or navigate.
That's great. Those are great resources. And just to reiterate to the people who are on the call and in the recording, is all of these resources will be available at the end of the video, and they're always available at the library for anything that we've discussed here today. So that's great. A couple more questions I have here is, did we talk yet about the risk factors around being abused or victimized? A little bit, but
a little bit, but probably not. I think I got a little bit more I could certainly add to that.
Okay.
It is about vulnerabilities, for sure. So, the more vulnerable you are in various ways, the more chance you have of being victimized. And that goes for, social isolation as a risk factor. If you're pulled away from your network, if an abuser manages to make sure you can't see your friends and other people, then they have clear sailing, right? So consider that, especially during these times where people are socially isolated. Having dementia puts you at higher risk. It increases your vulnerability. I hate to say this, but simply being a woman puts you at higher risk for family violence. And I would love to be able to say that all that awful stuff stops at age 55, but we know it doesn't. Mm-hmm. So that we take family violence right into becoming an older adult and still suffering from it. Again, we mentioned that, sometimes the perpetrator will have mental health or substance abuse issues. And if a family member or someone that is living with you has those issues, you become at higher risk. Experiencing abuse as a child or young adult, within a family, often historical trauma, it will repeat. Poor physical health. So if you are not able to, be mobile on your own or get in and out, and you have to depend on people, there's that power and control.